Okay. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. Welcome back to GDC, or if you haven't been to GDC, welcome to GDC. My name is Jason VandenBerghe. I am the design director at ArenaNet. And so we're just going to launch right in. Let's get going, shall we? We've got a lot to cover. For the last 8 years or so, I have been embarked on an attempt to merge together all the stuff that we know about player motivation into one grand model. It's settled on around the big five. And I'm going to take you through a real quick primer on what this was, just in case you haven't attended. First, who has attended a previous talk of mine on the engines of play? Okay, good. So primer is worthwhile. Okay, so it began with the big five. The big five is a personality model, sort of like the which Lord of the Rings characters are you tests that you get on BuzzFeeds, right? Except it's accurate. It has science behind it. Although those tests are surprisingly accurate, I think, from time to time, right? They're pretty good. It has in it these 5 different motivations of different domains of motivation, and inside each of those is 6 facets, individual facets that are spectrums of human motivation, and at this point, there is way too much data on that slide. We are not going to be able to digest anything like this. So, along the way in doing research, for a variety of reasons, we simplified the Big Five model, turned it into neuroticism goes away. If you're curious as to why, you can come and talk after the lecture. And then what we did is we looked for the motives that were the most useful when talking about gamers. That did a very nice reduction. We were able to reduce it down to 8 motivations, which we then mapped into gameplay preferences. So the idea is, if I'm interested in adventurousness, then I'm going to like games that have that kind of experience in it, right? And we took these 8 and we turned it into these. These are what it maps to, the 4 domains of play. And we turned it into a chart. Because we're designers, and we like charts, especially if they're, a 2x2. 2x2s reveal the universe's truths, man. 2x2s are the best. And like many people, when we were doing this work, we came to the conclusion that this kind of personality test is an excellent predictor of what I like to call taste. Which is, when I sit down to play a video game, what kind of game will I tend to play? It's not necessarily what I will play. People will play a great deal of games. But when I ask you what your favorite games are, and you take this personality test, we find a nice correlation between those 2 things. So that's nice. And that gives us archetypes. We can sort of assign characters to this to give us an idea of who these, each of these types of personalities and who they are. We reduced all of that down to this nifty symbol. So for the purposes of this talk, this symbol stands for personality theory, just in general. So we're going to talk about personality theory in general. So that's the first model in the engines of play. And there's a GDC talk on that if you're interested. The second part is this timeline, which is the player's journey. Over time, players encounter your game. Oh, I've heard about it. And then they try it out. And then when they like it, they continue to play it, right? And then over time, they'll adapt it into their identity, and they will become players of this game, right? I go from I've played this game to I play it. And what we've learned is, this personality theory. Personality theory does a great job of predicting the early experience of your gameplay behavior, but it does a very poor job of predicting what will cause you to stick around, right? It doesn't predict whether or not you will buy the sequel. So we need another model. Fortunately, we have one. Self-determination theory. Very, very good stuff. This is predicted by a thing called SDT. Who's heard of SDT? Who is aware of the, yes, good? Okay, good. If you get interested in this topic, if you're interested in player psychology, this is the model to study. Like, this one is the root foundation. This predicts what people really want out of your game, what makes a game meaningful in your life. This model is where we get the idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Okay, so what are they, real quickly? Autonomy is the universal urge to be causal agents of, sorry, I'm getting an animation problem there. Universal urge to be causal agents of one's own life, which means I like to make choices. I like to make choices and see those choices reflected in the world. Mastery is the universal seek to control outcomes and experience. Relatedness is just getting better at things. Whoa, why am I need to turn off animations is what I need to do. Well, all right, I will try to control the unruly slide monsters. Okay. Relatedness is this universal want to interact and be connected to people. So we like to have choice, we like to get better at things, we like to relate to other people. Fortunately, this guy, Scott Rigby, and Immersive as a group, translated this into game terms, which is pens. So this does a great job of predicting the other side of the thing. It does a great job of predicting what games you will stick around for and whether or not you will buy the sequel. Does your game satisfy autonomy, mastery, and relatedness? Cool. All right, so we have these two models. We have personality theory, we have our timeline, we have SDT. So it was time, of course, to form player psychology, VOLTRON. Who knows the theme song? We just put them all in one model, that's all we did. Just, so this is where we were. This is the engines of play. So I gave a talk in 2016 about how players move from taste to satisfaction, and understanding the player's journey is what the engines of play is all about, to give designers and developers a model that will help you understand what's going on in your player's mind. Okay, so we are far from done. So far, also, I want to throw out, I have had the luxury of using existing data and existing models. Now we're going to look for we're going to fill this hole in the middle of the model. There's a hole in the center, but there isn't a great deal of data to go around on this, so we're going to venture out into some scary territory here. The question that we're going to answer in this talk is, how do people get from one side to the other? Something magical happens when we go from I want to play this game to I'm becoming quite satisfied with playing this game, and I'm going to call this thing drives. Drives is the name that I have given to our more chemical motives, okay? So what are we talking about here? What is the thing? I have a coin in my hand here. I'm going to flip it. Is it heads or tails? Okay, so you feel that? Feel that sense? It's curiosity. Did you decide to feel curious? It just happened, right? It's curiosity. It was heads, by the way. It was heads. So good job. If you guessed heads, you were right. So I'm stimulating your curiosity drive there. Everyone has one, some more than others, right? Some of you may be like, oh, I don't feel it very much, but it's there. And it's not something we decide to have. When we go around a corner, curiosity is with us every day. When we come around a corner, curiosity is what is getting us to predict what we're going to see around the corner or get us curious about what we're going to see when we go around that corner, even if we know, even if we've been there many times before. So curiosity is a drive. There are others. Saving, as an example, collecting things, right? If I was to hand out a $1 bill, right, who among you would say no? Right? We will all take the $1 bill, because what the heck, right? That would be fine, right? Saving is also, you wouldn't make a decision as to whether or not you want that. If there's no strings attached, then why would you not, right? It's reasonable. Saving is another one. There are others. Vengeance, right? I punch you, you punch me right back. Social contact, right? The drive towards social contact. Learning. We like to learn. We're going to drive forward on things. Now, at this point, you may be thinking that I have gone mad. I mean, surely this is the most obvious topic in the world, right? I mean, how can there be an entire GDC talk about, what's in the box, right? I mean, we know about this stuff. I'm going to roll the dice. It's randomness. This is not stunning material, right? What the hell are you doing, VandenBerghe? And what does this have to do with the model? All right, well, let's go back. Here's the thing. I had long intended to add a section to the engines of play, to add this section to the engines of play, as like an appendix, right? Just like, oh, and then I'm just going to add this part about drives, right? Surely, I thought, right, there has been a ton of research into this, right? That we're going to just add drives to it. I'm just going to go and pull all of the research off of the shelf, and then we're going to be done. So I went to the research, right? Went out and went looking for the research. Now, I did not find what I expected to find. I was sorely disappointed. If you are a research scientist interested in human behavior, please for the love of all that matters, just fill this library. It turns out, but why? Why is there so little? There's some. We'll talk about that in a minute. But why, right? Well, give it some thought and some consideration. And it turns out the whole concept of drives has some problems in it that makes it not a great target for grant money and research time and academic attention. There's some risky stuff in here, and not always in the ways that one might expect. Here's one. So addiction is related to drives. You could be the research scientist who makes the claim and proves that games are addictive, or tries to make that claim to prove that, or proves that they're not, but do you want to be that person? Do you want to be embroiled in that controversy? Would you want to be the center of that? I know you would. Obviously, you would, you troll. Here's another one. Sex. Sex is another one. Sex is a drive, very, very powerful one. What kind of reward is waiting for a researcher on the other side of attempting to study the sex drive? Kinsey did this in the 50s, and it ruined him, right? And his whole entourage. So this is a dangerous topic. I mean, we would love to know. We're all very interested, of course. But there's not a great deal of research that is conclusive around exactly what each of us are interested in. Bloodlust. Here's another one. You want to do some research on bloodlust? Turns out there are not many white papers on this topic. Who here has seen Forbidden Planet? Who knows about this story? Okay, sci-fi classic, by the way, if you're interested in old people movies. In this film, a mad scientist has his brain boosted to the point where his deeper mind generates a monster, which is spoilers all over, so now you've seen the film. What we're talking about here is the id, this amazing piece of science fiction technology. This was special effects, and they're so good. It scared the shit out of me when I was 7. Monsters from the id. What is the id? So, Freud was wrong about a great many things. It turns out he was not so wrong about this idea of there being a superego, an ego, and an id. Deep inside our mind, there's a large part of our brain that is occupied with dealing with how to chemically respond to our environment, just keeping us alive and surviving, right? And it's creepy, this part. We are not necessarily in direct control of our id, and even bringing it up in casual conversation is often a little bit unnerving. Okay, so these are drives. I don't think that I'm saying anything controversial when I say that they're probably as chemical as much as they are motivational, right? So I went looking. So what did I find? I found a lot of material on violence in video games. Something like 95% of the white papers that you'll find are about violence in video games. I think anyone who's been through the last 20 years, not surprised by that. There's some contradictory stuff on addiction, and then there's not much else. There's exactly one reasonable model, and it's this thing. Stephen Rees, who's a researcher, came up with this thing called the 16 Basic Desires Theory, which is in the area of what I am talking about. I don't want to go through all of these. I want to let you know that this exists. It's an interesting model, but it is incomplete as far as taxonomies go. Scratch the surface a little bit, and we end up with some missing stuff. We already used some of these in the talk, but scratch the surface here, and we're missing a few. I'll throw a couple of examples out there. Awe is an example of one that got overlooked. Awe is the experience of wanting to witness beauty, right? You stand in front of the Great Valley and go, wow, that's amazing, right? That experience of Far Cry. Pat Matei is here. Prediction, here's another one. Prediction is our brain is constantly preoccupied with predicting what is about to happen. I think this is what happens when we watch a waterfall. Why are waterfalls and trees swaying in the breeze beautiful? I think it's because our brain is constantly predicting what is about to happen, and we're fascinated by the slight deviations between what we think will happen and what actually happens, right? So prediction is something that we are constantly engaged in. So there's more, there's lots, we can go through these, right? But let's compare now. I hope I've anchored in you kind of what we're talking about, this sort of root feeling. Let's compare these experiences to the stuff we talked about at the beginning of the talk, the personality theory stuff. Let's talk about our preference for fantasy or realism. There's this facet in the big five called imagination, right? I mentioned it before. And if you score high on imagination, and if you score high, you have a high level of imagination. And if you score low, it's called fact orientation. High scorers are more interested in their inner world than they are in the outer world. And fact orientation people are interested in the outer world more so than their inner world. This maps to a preference for fantasy and realism, right? So, it predicts a play preference for if you score high in imagination, you're going to tend to be interested in more fantastic settings. We get our Alice and Sam, right? You feel how different this is? Now we're talking about sort of higher brain stuff. Now we're talking about stuff that you have a choice over. Now we're talking about something that is a lot more comfortable for us to discuss and more comfortable to compare. Okay, so to take some extreme examples, just to further illustrate the issue, I think, and the reason why there isn't much research, you know, if these are drives, how would you feel if I were to talk about our preferences in sexuality as a spectrum? I don't mean your orientation, I mean what you're into. Your kinks. Would you like, how many retweets do you think that slide would get? Okay? This is what I mean by drives are not comfortable for us to study. Academics feel the same way. Like, I don't want to do a study of a king. That's not a thing, right? Here's another question. How many of these are considered virtues? Family? Sure. Order, maybe? Who among us would be proud to say, I'm high in bloodlust? High in vengeance. Yeah, I'm a very vengeful person. Right? Yeah, again, Izzy. My design manager at ArenaNet, ladies and gentlemen. So, how many of us would be comfortable in admitting and having a very strong drive towards power or vengeance in doing these studies, right? Okay, so drives live in this strange zone between what we would call physical reflex, dodging, right? And what we think of as ourself, as us, right? Our drives are things that happen to us. They are not us, generally. Contrast this to things like for our desire for mastery, for cooperation, for fantasy. These are things we would consider us instead of things separate from, right? So this is our topic for today. The understudied, undermodeled subject of drives. So, how does this apply to game design, right? What should we do with this information? Well, I have a theory. So I mentioned at the beginning, I will lay it out in some details now. Players use their personal taste to guide themselves into our game. They pick experiences they want based on what they have learned they like. And those tastes are widely variable. We are very, very different in our tastes, right? But they draw those kinds of experiences, these wear off quickly. They wear off very, very rapidly in a number of minutes. If I like explosions, right? I'm like, yeah, 1 explosion, 2, 3, 4, okay, fine, I got it, fine, explosions, fine, explosions, boy, right? Doesn't take long for that to wear off, right? And why do I keep playing when I get tired of that? Because I do keep playing, right? I play for 90 minutes or more, right? I'm not alone. And after this initial experience is satisfied, what keeps me going? Here's a question. So Scott Rigby showed that with his PENS model, that as time goes on, as play goes on, all players want the same thing. They want autonomy, mastery, and relatedness. And without those things at the long game, players will walk away. They'll leave, right? But here's the thing. Getting there requires a higher investment of time. Before mastery can begin to be felt by a player, they have to understand the rules, and they have to have time to work them out. Before autonomy can begin to be felt, I must see the outcome of my choices in some way. Before relatedness can begin to be felt, I have to have established some sense of my place in the community. It takes time for that to occur. It doesn't happen in 30 minutes. It takes a number of hours for this to occur. So why do I stick around? Okay. Here's my theory. Between these two experiences, between taste and satisfaction, is a place where boredom can take the player out, right? A game that does not reach out to help the player through the tough times will have a hard time convincing players to stick around long enough to get to the good stuff. So, drives are best used, and this is how we use them today, as in game design to help the player cross the gap from initial taste to long-term satisfaction, which is what I put in the title of the talk, so I'm trying to get this point across. Using these drive satisfactions of all different types, designers create breadcrumb trails of short-term, high-value successes for the player, right, that carry them along. Now, of course, there's lots of ways to misuse this, and I'm not going to go into those because I'm not interested in those. I'm interested in the positive values, right? But here's the thing. Every game you've ever loved And every game ever made does this. This breadcrumb trail exists throughout, right? Okay, let's look at some examples. So, strangely enough, of course, oops, let me back up. Strangely enough, most of you, I'm guessing, how many designers in the room? Oh, wow, a lot, good. Producers, programmers, yay. Audio people, artists, cool, all right, cool. So, most of you probably already know how this stuff works. I mean, we've gotten into the topic, right? We're all personally very familiar with how these drives sort of function. But we will become better at understanding how to use these things on a day-to-day basis by going a little bit deeper and breaking apart these experiences in more detail so that we can get our hands around it. So I'm going to take you on a tour through curiosity, just to give you an example that I hope you can use as a way to then go and do this exercise, this kind of thinking on your own with other drives that you're interested in your game design later on. Okay, so curiosity is cool. Let's take an example. We are exploring this place. It's a regular city, a grid of streets, basically, right? Just a simple grid. I can predict that, right? So what's happening in the curious part of my mind, right? At every corner, I make a guess about what I'm going to see. But until I actually look around the corner and verify that the grid pattern has continued, it's just an assumption. If the designer wants to provide the player a regular breadcrumb trail of curiosity satisfaction, what they need is surprises every so often, right? Now, it's not incredibly novel to think that I have to put unique and interesting variations inside a level design, right? You see what I mean by you already know this? Right? If it was just an empty grid that was 100% predictable, boredom would set in almost immediately. Okay, so that's not terribly revealing, but let's keep going and see what this can reveal for us. What about a place like this? Every direction here is filled with uncertainty. Now I love places like this. I love exploring places like this. Whenever I think about exploration, this is exactly what I think about. And boy, did I spend a lot of time in this particular forest. It is easy here for sameness to slip in, of course, if the terrain isn't varied. And if I get lost, we can be in trouble here. But what works here is keeping sightlines short, varying the terrain, and to give the player a way to every now and then pull out and sort of get a view of the lay of the land. The moment I see something like this, my curiosity is satisfied until I reach a place where I really can't see what's ahead of me. Now, maybe that's what the designer wants. Maybe the point is to focus on the light at the end there. Maybe there's an interesting object or a chest that I want to be sure that the player catches, right? Or maybe this space is boring and you should do something more interesting with it, right? Up to you. In an environment like this, curiosity now is gone. It's totally sidelined, right? There is, in fact, going to be a desperate dearth of curiosity satisfaction. You're not relying on that at all. This is an endurance test. Anyone who's played Journey knows how important the heights of the sand dunes were to convincing yourself that maybe over this next one there'll be something. Oh no, there's nothing. Okay, maybe over the next one. Maybe I'll say, oh, there's still nothing there, right? 15 times later, one thing, a rock, right? Curiosity is about the unseen, right? Again, not novel, but we're breaking it down, right? Trying to become conscious of something that is normally largely unconscious. So we've established in some simple form how the drive satisfaction of curiosity functions on a second-to-second, minute-to-minute basis, right? The player's brain is has a side process in it that is always generating these little bursts of curiosity about anything anything unseeable, right, in the world around them. Which is why horror games work, by the way, right? This is, in a situation like this, I've had all of my curiosity sidelined except for that one corner around the end at the end of the hallway. And then all I have to do is put in a sound that is a little bit suggestive, and now suddenly I'm fixating on exactly what's going to be around the corner, right? Making predictions about what I'm going to see. There's many uses of this internal drive. And again, I'm just sensitizing you to the process. The notion here is not that this is particularly revelatory, but that this is how we should learn to analyze these experiences. But let's go back to our exploration. We can say it this way. By chaining these little moments of curiosity satisfaction, by creating breadcrumb trails of drive stimulation, our players will be able to journey through our locations often multiple times, without accumulating enough boredom to be driven away. I want you to think about boredom as something that accumulates in players as they go, right? And drive stimulation, the role of drive stimulation is to stave off boredom, right? So why? How does that work? Let's take it one step further. Freed from boredom, the player can now stay a while, and listen. Hey, there it was. Little call out there. They can come to understand the layout of a space. Their curiosity pulls them into nooks and crannies. It encourages them to look at the place from multiple vantage points, to reward them for making guesses and stuff. And then along the way, they're filling in their internal model of the world, so that when a challenge appears suddenly, they are able to fall back on this database that they weren't aware they were accumulating and experience the satisfaction of mastery. They mastered it painlessly by being drawn around the space, okay? By placing all of these small satisfactions, it made this experience a pleasure, and in fact, if it was designed well. And depending on how well the designers did their job, that experience was effortless for them. Okay, so drives are the bridge between initial taste and long-term satisfaction. Cool. All right, so how do I turn it into something more useful for that? What am I trying to do here? What is the goal? I hope by now I've overmade my point, so that's nice and clear. First thing I want to do is, you're familiar with Jesse Schell's Lenses, the Book of Lenses? Yes, if you haven't, you should freaking read that thing. Jesse Schell, read the thing. I want to give you a new lens, right? I want to give you a new lens, the lens of moment-to-moment drive satisfaction. I want you to think about these questions. I want you to ask yourself, as you're designing the game, are you providing your player enough variation and enough second-to-second drive satisfaction to carry the player from initial taste to satisfaction? This is one takeaway that I want you to have. Is there something else? Like, could we have a taxonomy? Could we have a list, please? It would be great if we could just have a list of all the drives. That would be amazing, right? Well, we've got this one, and I'm borrowing it. Like, I'm using some of these in here. But the problem is, the TLDR version of that is that if there is a list of all of these, I haven't found it. If anybody knows of a list like this, please send me an email or reach out to me. I would love to see it, but as far as I can tell, it has not been studied. But that's okay, because I hope that a lot of what I've said, maybe I'm rearranging the ideas in your head, but it should make a certain amount of sense. We know how these things work. But let's try a different approach. Let's ask ourselves this question. Is there anything new out there? Is there a drive that you are not aware of, potentially, that we don't have a language for yet, right? That you should know about, that can make a huge difference in your design efforts moving forward? Is there something that we have overlooked? Wouldn't that be cool? Okay. The answer is yes, absolutely. Tend to be friend. Dan Cook asked me at lunch or dinner a couple months ago. He was like, "What game design ideas have you encountered in the last year that have blown your mind?" And this is it. This is the one for me. Okay. Tend to be friend. Let's go. First, I was introduced by this idea by the inimitable Berghe, who has given multiple talks on the topic. If what I'm going to tell you, if you find this interesting, I absolutely recommend that you go and look at her videos, read her work on the subject. There's lots of other people who are sharing this information. Who here has heard of Tend to Befriend? Oh, nice. A few. We're getting there. Good. We're going to continue the presentation now. Okay, so what is Tend to Befriend? In the year 2000 around, Dr. Shelley Taylor and colleagues did a review of adrenaline research done during the heyday of fight and flight research in the 70s. All the research that was done that established fight or flight as a theory happened in the 70s. And Dr. Taylor and her colleagues had reviewed it. They found that, so most of the research had been done on rats by exposing themselves to stress, like electric shocks, right? And then sampling their adrenaline levels, right? It was, that's how it was done. And this is how the fight or flight theory was validated. The idea was we create these rats under stress, and then their adrenaline levels go up, they get more aggressive, oh, this is the thing, right? Basically. So it turned out, though, that there was a bunch of data, there was a bunch of rats in the study who didn't match the theory. There was a bunch of noise in the sample in all of these tests. And so they did what any reasonable scientist would do, which is they threw out the data. Right? It should come as no surprise that it was all the female rats that they threw the data out. Anyone who has been following the revelations about scientific research and up until today would not be stunned by this. Dr. Taylor found this to be striking, to say the least, because part of the reason they had gone on this re-examination in the first place was that from an evolutionary standpoint, fight and flight isn't complete enough to explain human behavior. It kind of is incomplete as a theory. Let me explain to you what I mean. The fight or flight model is based on this very simple assumption that when we sense a threat, right? We go, threat. Our body shoots adrenaline into our bloodstream, and our heart rate goes up, and our muscles, we get ready to run or whatever, right? This is good. It makes sense to determine whether or not we're going to, run away or battle the tiger. Good theory, right? Seems to make sense, and it applies to a lot of things. Here's the problem. From an evolutionary standpoint, when you apply the same fight or flight model to anyone responsible for the life of another, children in particular, but any other person, anyone who's responsible for someone else, right? This theory doesn't work out, because if you're responsible for a life of another person, and the tiger shows up, and you run, you both die, because you're slow. The tiger's going to catch you. If you fight, and then you lose, the person that you were responsible for dies. This is not a good adaptation. So what do you do in this situation? We are collective tribal monkeys, so we run into this situation a lot, right? This happened all the time when we were evolving, right? So caregivers are in a predicament, one that the simplicity of fight and flight doesn't really resolve. We need a better theory. So, tend to befriend. Dr. Taylor were interested in this, not in adrenaline, but in oxytocin, which is inaccurately called the love chemical. Oxytocin is because oxytocin increases when we kiss or when we hug, when we're in positive social situations. The theory of tend and befriend is this. The idea is that people, especially women, and we'll come back to that, evolved social means for dealing with stress that involved caring for offspring and protecting them from harm, or turning to the social group for protection from offspring. So this is the theory. If a tiger shows up and you're responsible for the life of a child, a better tactic is to yell for help, hide, and then do everything you can to care for and protect the other person that you are responsible for, hoping that the dice go in your favor in the form of, say, a bunch of reinforcements. This works. This is a strategically sound idea. What this means is, evolutionarily, it makes more sense for caregivers to experience an increase in the drive to care when experiencing fear than it does for them to have an increase in the desire to fight. Tension, stress, increase in the desire to care. And if you're responsible for the life of a child or for another, right, before the tiger shows up, it is to your great advantage to have already established a bunch of care and support network with as many other people as you can. Because while one caregiver, right, protecting a person is no match for a tiger, 20 caregivers with a child, right, is dinner, right? Good to go. So the idea is that stress and fear trigger, in some large part of the population, an increase in oxytocin, not adrenaline. Okay? That's the notion. The adrenaline response still happens, but in many people, the oxytocin one wins. Okay, so people evolve a social means for dealing with stress that involves caring for offspring, turning to the social group. Cool. All right, nice. Now you might understand, given the dominance of adrenaline and fight or flight gameplay in video games, why this notion is, I think I'm putting this forward to you, right? I think this is a very interesting theory. But before we go on, I want to talk a little bit about the meta here, because our subject today is affectionately referred to as evolutionary psychology. Okay? We're talking about the lens of behavior in evolutionary, and also by its much less fun name, gender determinism. So gender determinism is, of course, the belief that that behavior is determined by biological factors, specifically gender, right? Humans are very, very good at detecting gender differences, even when they're not there. I mean, there are plenty of gender differences, but we're also really good at overextending our analysis. Let me give you an example of what I mean. This is what Dr. Taylor said, right? People evolve as social means for dealing with stress and et cetera. This is what was reported. Okay, I would like to demonstrate the mistake that's being made here so that we understand how this happens, right? Agreeableness, so I'm going back to the big five for a second. One of the domains in the big five is called agreeableness. Okay? Agreeableness is what it sounds like. Are you an agreeable person, basically? Are you friendly in a way, right? It's basically the thing. And it has been widely reported that women are more agreeable than men. Sounds good. Fits our cultural expectations, right? And of course, you know, that's what the data says. So cool. Here's what that actually means. The dotted, okay. The dotted line here is women. The solid line is men. The scores on the bottom are, you know, that's 1 to 5. While it is technically true that on average women are slightly more agreeable than men, right? This idea misses the point. There is a 10x greater variation between two individuals of the same gender than there is between the genders, okay? Two random people will be wildly differentiated, much more so than the genders ever are. This mistake happens again and again and again. Very slight differences are taken to reinforce cultural dialogues. This gets us into trouble. Okay, so if I haven't made it clear, this is not what we're talking about. Men have oxytocin. Women have adrenaline. This is not about gender. However, this does explain to me why I love this fucking game so much. Oh my God. Oh, wow. Okay. Because, I mean, it's got some violence in it, right? But it is almost all about tending to your crops and to your pets and befriending everyone and filling up the little heart meters all the way to the way. Oh my God. And you get this hits, right? So let's look at a different game. This game, Diablo. I mean, when I land this whack on the baddie, right, and this creature explodes into 1 billion gold coins, right, I get this weird internal release of pleasure. It's great stuff, right? Oh yeah, the imaginary threat has been relieved. I fought my way clear of it, right? By the same token, when I finally trigger the "okay, we are friends now" cinematic in Stardew Valley, and I learned that my favorite shopkeeper here, Pierre, is actually a closet pothead, and that he's really adorable about it. I hope that's not spoilers because, oh, he's so cute. He's like, oh, dude, don't tell anyone. We are now imaginary friends. I get this weird release of oxytocin. I get this thing that happens in my head where I'm all excited, right? My oxytocin system rewards me for creating a situation where I can rely on him if an imaginary tiger shows up. We're buds, right? It's cool. Okay, so why does this all matter to you guys as game developers? You know, how do we use this? It's really hard for me to know, but I can tell you that when I shared this concept with my wife, this is Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Mwah. She stared at me for a very long time, right? And when a tear finally slid down her face, she said to me, "This theory explains my whole life." She went on to explain that she had always felt like a chemical, motivational outsider. Because we all know about fight or flight, right? When something bad happens to you, you're supposed to want to run or attack. But that had never happened to her. In times of fearful stress, my wife's response generally has been to think immediately about her loved ones, instantly. And for much of her life, she thought that there was something wrong with her. Because this is what we call codependence. But what if this is normal? What if this is how we're wired? What if this isn't a disorder? What if it is perfectly normal for a large portion of the population, men and women, to respond to stress and fear with an urge towards caregiving and relationship building directly, chemically, without any training or socialization, no role models required, built in? I don't feel the urge to go into great detail about the game design implications. I'm also not going to have enough time for that. You are designers and developers. Your place in this world is to learn the truth. I believe that your place in this world is to learn the truth and turn that truth into experience for your players so that they can understand the world around them. But I would like to tell you a story. This is Bree's story. She's the one who introduced me to these ideas. And since I will never be able to do a better job of telling this story than she does, I will, with her permission, thank you, Bree, you're amazing, tell her story in her own words, largely her own words. Okay, so Bree's closest friend is her cousin Christina, and she has been she's been very hostile to video games, to Bree's love of video games for a long time. She's an art historian and when Bree would message her about stress and work, she wouldn't offer support. She would just be like, you should get out of that stupid industry, right? She thought Bree was wasting her life on video games. And then one day, she started to ask about games. Christina asked Bree about games, and she was thrilled. So she recommended Journey. It seemed like a natural fit, but to Bree's surprise, Christina didn't finish it. She didn't like that there's this snake that can kill you. It's not that it was too hard. It was just that Christina was deeply uninterested in being attacked at all in a game. But it did intrigue her enough that she asked for more recommendations, and so Bree offered her favorite game, Skyrim. Christina Googled it and texted her back something like, I don't know why you would think I would like this. I don't watch Game of Thrones, I don't like swords, I don't like fighting, I don't like dragons. Bree told her that she would hate the first bit with the dragon, but then to just get through it and then give it a chance and get back to her with their thoughts. But Christina didn't get back to her, not for 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, her cell phone rang. Now, no one ever calls Bree because she knows she doesn't answer, but when she saw Christina's name on the screen, her stomach dropped, and she knew that there had to be some kind of family emergency. She picked up the phone, and Christina was crying. She said, Lydia died. There's no Lydia in Bree's family. Christina was talking about the character in Skyrim. For 3 weeks, Christina had been playing Skyrim obsessively, and now she'd accidentally killed Lydia, and she didn't have a recent save game. She said through her tears that she didn't realize that you could develop an emotional attachment to a character in a video game at all. She didn't realize you could create your character and exist as a version of yourself in a world full of characters whom you care about. Now, of course, Bree had never realized that Christina didn't know this because she knew this so deeply, having grown up with them. Christina said to Bree that for all these years, it wasn't that she didn't like video games, it's that she didn't know what they were. When Bree tells this story at conferences, people tell her their Lydia stories. We all have a Lydia story. I do. And the truth is, Christina stopped playing Skyrim after Lydia died because she really doesn't like swords or fighting or dragons, and there hasn't been a game that has satisfied her since. And in Tim Gunn's words, this is a design failure, not a customer issue. Okay, that's Bree's story. Thanks, Bree. So, as designers, I believe that our place in the world is to learn the truth and to turn that truth into player experience. The truth is that a huge component of our player base, male and female, gain more chemical satisfaction from the experience of real relationship building than they do from shooting a bad guy. Chemically. The truth is that a huge component of our player base, male and female, don't want to fight back or fight at all. They want to care for something. They want to see the effects of their care and improve the lives of their imaginary friends. And there are many genres that are already exploring these ideas, right? But I felt it necessary to offer you these tools. The truth is that the players come to our games because of what they see in the store window. They have their taste, and they like what they see in the window. They step in there, right? The dragons, the swords, the blocks, and the jumping, and the realism, that's what they come in for. But what they really want long-term is the satisfaction of mastery, autonomy, and relatedness. But they don't want these things because they're bored. Self-determination theory came into being when a group of researchers started asking people working in all kinds of jobs whether or not the time they were spending at work was worthwhile, whether or not at the end of their life they felt they would look back on that time as fondly or as lost. So, boredom is one of the many things that can prevent people from reaching their satisfaction goals and drives are how we overcome that boredom. A huge part of our job as designers is to present our audience with the second-to-second drive stimulations that they need to get from initial taste to satisfaction. And if game designers misunderstand or overlook key portions of our population, if they overlook chemical motivations that are a huge part of life for a huge amount of people in this world, we leave out vast swaths of people that could be entertaining themselves with our software and our board games and our experiences. And this is not just me standing up there being hopeful and idealistic. This is the most recent science that I can find, and I'm trying to bring it to your attention, right? The science tells us that people are driven to make all different types of interactions in the games that they want to play. Your players want their drives to be stimulated. They want to be curious. They want to care for things. They want to feel confronted, right? The question I want you to ask yourself as you move forward into the future is this one. How can we expand the potential of our art form with these ideas? What game design structures might we have overlooked because we were not aware of the full spectrum of chemical possibilities inside the human mind? How can we, as a group, increase the expressive potential of games as a whole through new ideas that leverage these types of experiences in a better way? And what else is missing from this behavior model? What have I got wrong here, right? Where are we still getting it wrong? If you know, and if you think you know the answer to these questions, please contact me. I need to know where I've fucked it up. And thank you very much for coming to the talk. Whew.